All right, so we are kicking off a short 2-week series starting today and next week on this topic of discipleship. Our title is just simply Disciple. And in order for us to get started with that, I think it's important because sometimes we in church, we can throw around these terminologies of these words that we're like, what do these actually mean? And at its basic core understanding, a disciple is a learner, okay? It's a person who learns the way of Jesus. The way that I would define discipleship is this. It means learning to live the life that Jesus would live if Jesus lived your life. Okay, say that 5 times fast. It's kind of like the old, if you remember the what would Jesus do bracelets. It's living a life that Jesus would live if Jesus lived your life. There's another Christian author named John Mark Comer who he said discipleship is really apprenticing under Jesus. And as we apprentice under Jesus, we learn to live like him, look like him, and love like him in every way and in every shape. And so we want to follow Jesus with our lives. And in order to do that, then it's like, okay, if we want to move from where we are to becoming more like Christ, how do we have the plans or the practices in place? And here at Woodridge, what we've got is really 5 practices that we want to continually repeat and teach on time in and time out. I'm going to give those to you today. Maybe as you're sitting there just thinking about it, how are you doing in these 5 ways? And I want to highlight one that we'll be looking at today and next week. But the very first discipleship practice that we talk about a lot is to spend time with God. All right, just plain and simple, spend time with God. We say this a lot. Whenever you spend time with somebody, you eventually become more and more like them, okay? You talk like them, you speak like them, you act like them. And what better person to be like than to spend time with God and become more and more like him? And if you're curious, like, what does that look like? One of the best ways to do that is by picking up a Bible and engaging with God's word. Not just reading it, but studying it. That's why every Sunday and every Saturday night, we have our messages based on Scripture. And what I realize is that there might be some of you here today that you don't own a Bible. And if that's you, I've got something for you. I encourage you after the service to stop out at our Next Steps table, and we've got free Bibles. Free, no charge at all. And here's the amazing part about it. Since September through Christmas, we gave out over 120 Bibles. Like, I'm just praising God for that. And so there's no shame if you're like, I'm here, but I don't have a Bible, just pick one up. And if you're like, I don't know where to start with it, we've got also a little bookmark in there. It's the 21-day challenge. I call it 1-1-1. 1 minute in silence, 1 minute in prayer, and 1 chapter in the Bible, starting in the book of John. And it'll take you through 21 days to build a new habit. But that is just free of charge. We want to help you and resource you as you spend time with God. The second practice that we talk a lot about is to connect in community. Inside your program, you'll see that we've got a ton of men's groups, women's groups that are kicking off in the next few weeks, QR codes to scan and learn more about that. But what we say is that our faith doesn't grow when we sit in rows, but our faith grows when we move from rows into circles, when we can connect and engage and pray with each other. The third practice is to serve others. We want to serve on-site and serve off-site in our neighborhoods and our place of employment, all of those sort of things. We want to have a posture of serving. The fourth is to invest in and invite others. Invest in your friends, your relatives, your acquaintances, your neighbors, your coworkers. Bless them, see the good in their life, and then invite them into what God is doing in your life or invite them to join us here at church. So invest in and invite others. And then the fifth practice is this idea of living generously. Living generously. Live generously with your time, with your talent, with your treasures, and with your thoughts. I believe that if we put these 5 practices into place, if we put them as habits in our lives, then we will naturally become more and more like Jesus because he did these 5 things as well. And so that's what we're looking at with this series on discipleship, to be a disciple. Now, if you've kind of got like an eagle eye and you were looking at the front cover, you might have noticed that the word disciple is spelt out, but the S is not the letter S, it's actually the money sign. Okay, it's a little on the nose. Okay, I didn't design that. I think it's a little bit on the nose there. But before you get up and leave, because you're thinking like, oh, the church, they're just after my money. They're after my checkbook. Let me just give a little bit of clarity real quick to that. You know, like I said before, if we want to be a people who are wildly generous, there's no better person to learn about generosity from than Jesus himself, because he is the most generous individual that we will ever come across. In fact, let me just give you one verse. It's perhaps one of the most well-known verses in all of the Bible. If y'all remember Tim Tebow, he would have his eye black and he'd have the verse John 3:16 written on it. And that verse goes something like this: For God so loved the world that what did he do? He gave his one and only son. And right there, we see the heart of generosity, something that was so near and dear to God's heart. His only son, he gave for your betterment and my betterment and for our blessing, that we might have new life in and through him. And so today, just to kind of level set with you, I have no financial ask. Hopefully you can kind of just, all right, and plus we locked the door, so you can't get out. I'm kidding. I have no financial ask, but what I do have is just an invitation for you to maybe step into, what does it look like to live generously? That's what we're after today. Okay, what does it look like for us to build really a theology of generosity? I think that's important for us to think through what the scriptures say as they are our guiding factor in life. And so when I think about generosity, it's typically associated with money. There's another kind of idea or another word that gets tossed around in our culture today, and it's this word abundance. So how does generosity and abundance go together? There's a phrase sometimes that just says, I'm manifesting abundance, as if abundance will just appear out of nowhere. But I think the culture around us has this idea of what abundance looks like. But I think with the theology of generosity, God gives us a greater vision of what abundance looks like. And God's vision for that is this. In God's kingdom, abundance is not accumulation, but rather it's stewardship of treasure and talents. Okay, let me say that again. In God's kingdom and God's vision, abundance is not accumulation of more and more stuff, but rather it's the stewardship of our treasures and of our talents, the way that God has crafted and created us, and also the things that we treasure so much that are near and dear to our hearts. And so that's what I want us to think about and what I want us to lean into and learn from today. Now, I get it though. When we talk about generosity, man, so often it can be enveloped with shame and with guilt. And my hope is not to do that today. Rather, what I want to do is just present to you what I would call a case study from the Bible, from a gentleman named King Solomon, one of the greatest kings in all of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, for us to learn from him and then evaluate how we can move forward in a posture and in a lifestyle of generosity. And so what I want to do is I want to invite you to pull out your programs, flip onto the backside. What you'll see there is the outline. I did my best to give you as much clarity as possible for it. What you'll see is that as we do a flyby overview of the life of Solomon, we've got a ton of scripture that we're going to be covering today. I can't drill into it deeply. It'll just be really guiding for us. But I invite you to take some of this program. Don't just throw it in the recycling, but take it with you. Grab a Bible if you don't have one, and really do some study this week as we learn about the life of Solomon. But let's just start with how Solomon began. Okay, Solomon was the son of King David. I'll talk about him in just a little bit. But Solomon was a young king, and God literally approached him one day and said, Solomon, what do you want? And I love this because, what would you do if all of a sudden God he appeared out of nowhere and said, what do you want? How would you respond? Frankly, I have no idea what I would say. But Solomon, in that moment of sheer brilliance, he says, Lord, I'm a young king. Won't you give me a wise and discerning heart? Won't you give me wisdom, is what Solomon asks for. And I love that because I don't know about you, I could use more wisdom. I think we could all collectively use more wisdom in our day and age today. And notice what Solomon didn't ask for. He didn't ask for riches. He didn't ask for vengeance on his enemies. He didn't ask even for long, healthy life. He asked for wisdom. That was his prayer. And we can see the way that God responds. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 10. It says this, the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but rather for discernment, aka wisdom, and administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, God's kind of like the classic infomercial, but wait, there's more. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Did you catch it? He's like, God, will you give me wisdom? And God's like, yeah, I'll give you wisdom and I'll give you even more. I will give you that wealth. I will give you the honor. And he gives him this charge. He says, but continue to walk in obedience to my laws and my decrees, not because they are a weight, but because this is the pathway into having a flourishing life. And so Solomon begins in his first prayer with God in a place of just proximity and closeness to God, asking for wisdom. But then what we see is that Solomon's biggest mission, his purpose in life, was to build up the city of Jerusalem. His father David was a warrior king and had gone to battle and war. And now Israel, the nation at that time, was experiencing a time of peace and prosperity, a great time to build up the temple and the infrastructure of the city around it. And so David, some of the final words that he says to his son and the provision that he gives to his son Solomon, it looks something like this in 1 Chronicles 22. David said to his son, I have taken great pains to provide for the temple. Like any good parent, it's like, man, I've taken great pains to let you play hockey, kiddo. I've taken great pains to provide for the temple of the Lord. And look at what he says here. 100,000 talents of gold. Talents is not like a talent, like a gifting. It's a monetary amount. 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, quantities of bronze and iron that are too great to be weighed, and wood and stone. And he says, and if that's not enough, hey, guess what? You may add to them if you like. You have many workers, stonecutters, masons, and carpenters, as well as those skilled in every kind of work, in gold and silver, bronze and iron, craftsmen that are beyond number. And then, like any good dad to a son, what does he say? Now get to work, kid. Now begin the work, and may the Lord be with you. Solomon gets this amazing inheritance. He gets all of the resources, he gets all the workers that he needs to fulfill his mission and purpose in life, which is to build this immaculate, incredible, beautiful, stunning temple that the world has never seen before. And it starts out so well. But then Solomon begins to slide. And what you can actually begin to see within Solomon is that prayer that he prayed at the beginning, a heart full of wisdom and discernment, eventually becomes a distant memory. And no longer is Solomon walking in devotion to the Lord, but purely out of desire for his own heart. And what I would say, Pastor Jared said this last week, but it's this question that I think Solomon dealt with then, and I think that we still deal with today. It's finding that line between what is enough and what is extravagance. What is enough and what is excess and extravagance? Because look at what Solomon did. It continues along in 1 Kings 10:21. It was a heart of devotion for a divinely sanctioned temple, but then it slid into desire. Verse 21, all King Solomon's goblets were gold. We go to the state fair, we go to Chuck E. Cheese, right? We get the plastic cups, y'all. You know what I'm talking about? That would not fly in Solomon's day because it was the goblets that needed to be made of gold. And all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon, what were they? Pure gold. Look at what it says. Nothing was made of silver. Why is that? Because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. Silver was basically worthless because there was so much gold and accumulation of that. But it doesn't stop there. It keeps going just a few verses later in verse 26. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. Look at the number. 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. And so you can just begin to see Solomon is just accumulating more and more wealth, more and more gold, more and more chariots and horses to the tune of 12,000 horses. Now here's the thing. Here's the issue that we see within Solomon. He had this slide towards lavishness and extravagance. But what we actually see is it's not just that. He's actually being deliberately disobedient to what God had called the kings to. Let me just give you a really quick zoom out. We are in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles that are history books. If we were to actually go back in time several hundred years before Solomon, we go back to the 5th book of the Bible, which is the book Deuteronomy, which is where the law was given. And if you don't know what the law is, it's essentially the rule book for the nation of Israel. It's like, hey, here's how I want you to live. It was God's gracious gift to them. And within that, there were also rules and commandments to the kings as well. All right, in case you're wondering, is this for me or is this for the kings? Look at what it says in Deuteronomy 17. It says this, the king, who's it for? You, Solomon. But look at what it says. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of the horses. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back again that way. He's basically saying you're not to go back into the slavery of Egypt. The king must also not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. And then look at this. He must not also accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. And so whereas the gold was divinely sanctioned to build up the temple, now all of a sudden we see Solomon defying the law, defying God's directive for his own life, to not just build this beautiful temple, but to actually build an empire all around him, to accumulate more and more horses and gold. So why are the horses important? Because essentially at that time, horses were utilized in warfare. So he's basically saying, I trust my own my own horses, my own soldiers, more so than I trust God. And wealth and gold, I trust the gold that I've accumulated more so than I trust the provision of God. And so what we see is that now his desire had turned his devotion away from God. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just the treasures that he had accumulated. It was also his talents. As we said, Solomon was a wise, savvy business leader. And so in order to build up this infrastructure, to build up this empire, he had to be pretty good. He had to be pretty entrepreneurial, pretty good administratively. It says earlier in 1 Kings that he had appointed some friends to oversee the forced labor. You can't just have money, but you have to have people to build it up as well. And so he put his own people to the forced labor. In fact, later on at the end of his life, the nation of Israel splits into the northern kingdom and into the southern kingdom because the people were saying Solomon was too harsh. He was too much of a taskmaster on us. And so it doesn't matter the empire you build if the empire doesn't stand much longer after you. And I just think that this is incredibly disheartening to see this slide that Solomon experienced. Why was it? Was it fear? Was it insecurity? I don't quite know. But Solomon took his eyes off the main thing. He took his eye off the ball for just a moment. And what I would say, the big idea that I think comes back to Solomon is this. I think Solomon chose coveting over covenanting. I think Solomon's heart was characterized, it was pushed, it was pulled by coveting over covenanting. Now you're probably sitting there thinking what does he mean by that? That's kind of a little bit of a tongue twister. Well, what do we mean by coveting? Coveting, at the end of the day, is really this unquenchable, insatiable desire and want for more. It's having an envious heart and an envious mind. It's saying, hey, when is enough really enough? It never is enough. I just need to accumulate more. And undergirding covetousness is really a comparison. It's really a sort of a competition that's gone awry. But what does coveting do? Coveting turns the blessings of God into burdens whenever our desire outruns devotion to God. Okay, it takes the blessings that God has given to us and it turns them into burdens because now we've got to manage and take care of all these other things whenever our desire and our want outruns the devotion to God. But coveting doesn't just do that. Coveting replaces covenantal love with consumption. For Solomon, it was I'm going to push down whoever I need to in order to get to the top. I'm going to put people to forced labor and I'm going to accumulate even more for myself. But covenanting, what I mean with that is covenantal love is this beautiful picture that God gave to us. He says, the command that I have for you is to love God. And how do we love God? Why do we love God? Because he first loved us. It's to love God vertically, and as you love God vertically, you can love others horizontally. And so for Solomon, his love was not vertical, it was not horizontal, but his love was downward and inward. He kept looking inward to himself, coveting over covenanting in his life. And I just think about it, it's if we're not cautious, he started out so well with this prayer of wisdom, with abiding and being close and intimate with God, but eventually this slide naturally happened. And for us, it's hey, New Year's resolution, woo, we've got all of our things starting out well. But my hope and prayer for us is that we don't just start well, but we continue and we finish well as well. And I just think, for many of us, our treasures and our talents, if we're not cautious, can quickly be turned inward towards a coveting posturing rather than a place and a lifestyle of generosity. And so what I want us to just think on is one question. one question, right? I don't want to command you. I don't want to shame you. I don't want to guilt you. I don't want to direct you and say, this is what you have to do. This is what you need to do. But what I want to do is give you a question to ponder and to reflect on as you think about what generosity might look like. And that question is this: inspired by God's covenantal love, how can you personally steward your treasure and your talents? Okay, inspired by God's covenantal love, how can you personally steward your treasure and your talents? Let's break this down. Okay, inspired and motivated by God's covenantal love. We say this quite a bit because we love because God first loved us, and so we can't give what we have not first received. Like, I hope we realize this, that God is so kind and generous to us that he deposits it into us, and we are really just conduits and vessels and pipelines of generosity to others. And so revel in, sit in God's love first and foremost. But it's not just that covenantal love, but it's how can you personally steward? That word stewardship is so key and important. I hope that you realize this, that since God is the creator of everything, God is actually the owner of all things, right? The head of cattle on the hill, all the way down to our jobs and to the cars that we drive. But what he says is now we are stewards or managers of the resources. And I don't know about you, but I'm like, God, I want to steward the things that you have given me well. All the way back in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, he put Adam and Eve in the garden, and he says, I want you to cultivate and I want you to keep, aka steward, the earth around you. So how can you personally steward, and then thinking through your treasure and through your talents? What I would say is there's no number on what it looks like to steward your treasure, whether it's a big account or a small bank account, whether we're middle school, high school, college age, young professionals, working professionals, empty nesters. It's just thinking through, asking God, how can I steward these treasures? But also, God, how can I steward my talents, the way that you have crafted me and created me uniquely to make an impact? And let me just be honest with you. Coming out of Christmas, this is something that, like, my wife Cassie and I, we're constantly coming back to. It's like Christmas was great. It was so much fun, but then we're sitting there like, woof. Like, how do we help our kiddos? And how can we as well not just think about accumulation, but walk in gratitude and contentment and help our kids and ourselves also to think about generosity? Like, it's a journey. We are on it too. I'm not a master at it at all. But we're always asking that question, how, Lord, do you want us to be generous to our friends, to our neighbors, to maybe even people who we don't even know yet? I think that might be what it looks like to steward. It means to have this posture of generosity. Just to simply have a posture, maybe a simple prayer that you can ask God is this: God, who do you want me to be generous with? And as you pray on that, as you think on that, maybe a person will come to mind, maybe an organization or a place will come to mind, and then I just invite you to step forward in that generosity. But I just hope and pray that we'll continue to step into the streams of God's goodness for our lives. Let me just say this. This church is wildly generous, right? I'm not trying to come down. Many of you are just so incredibly generous. My encouragement to you is keep being generous. And some of you, this is brand new for you as well. I want to invite you to take a step into generosity. Take a step of faith in that regard. My hope and prayer for us is that we see God's kingdom-sized vision. That abundance, it's not accumulation of stuff, but rather it's generosity as we steward our treasures and our talents. And today we have no better way to be reminded of this than by coming to the table. Because as we hold this bread and this cup, we're reminded of John 3:16. For God so loved the world, you and me. What did he do? He generously gave of his son. And so as you hold this bread and this cup in your hand in just a brief moment, my hope and prayer for you is that you will be inspired by God's covenantal, generous love for you. And then that will overflow into generosity for those all around us. May we be a generous people.